Good morning. Welcome to the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners board briefing. Chair Vega Peterson is excused. Commissioner Singleton is joining virtually, and we expect Commissioner Jones-Dixon shortly. For those presenting today, please turn your mic on when you begin speaking and off when you're completed your remarks. For all presenters, please state your name for the record before speaking to or responding to questions. Our briefing topic this morning is an informational briefing on progress on the zoning code improvement project. And I will let the panel take it away, and then we'll have time for questions afterwards.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brim Edwards. Good morning. My name is Megan Gibb. I serve as the Land Use Planning Director for the county. And we're here this morning to share a briefing on our zoning code update project. I'm here today with Kevin Cook on the far left, who's our principal planner, and he's the project manager for this project, and Matt Hasty, our consultant, who's undertaken this project with us. Prior to Matt giving a presentation, I just wanted to provide a little context. Why do we regulate land uses? Just basic for the benefit of the audience. It's required by state law. But also our land use regulations are meant to help protect public interest and then balance environmental protection and community needs. We want to be able to keep Sylvia Island available for agriculture and also prevent unchecked development of the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. Our code is very out of date. It can be very overly restrictive and regulatory, and it makes it hard to do some of the simplest things like building a garage or building a shed in your backyard. So it needs to be updated to, first of all, become compliant with state law and also better balance our interests and better align with county values. The code is one part of a three-pronged improvement strategy for land use planning. The other two parts are the hiring of new staff. Thank you to this board for the additional staff FTE that we got. That position plus the two vacancies that we had, all those positions have been hired and they're starting in a couple weeks. That's going to allow us to reopen front counter once they're up and running and get permits out the door faster, which should be good news for our commissioners and for the public. And then the last component of our overall improvement strategy is moving our organizational culture towards a more community and customer-centered approach. And then just for a big picture on the funding and phasing, we do have a DLCD grant, Department of Land Conservation and Development, which is a state agency. It's about $110,000. And last year the project was funded with one-time only money from the board. This year it's being funded with $100,000 from the director's office, and phase 3 funding will be determined as part of this upcoming budget process. So with that, I'll have Matt take it away, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. And again, my name is Matt Hasty. I'm a senior project manager with MIG, a consulting firm here in Portland and up and down the West Coast. And I'll just note that I'm here to talk to you, but there's a number of folks in my office who are really doing a lot of the work here. So Kathy Corliss, who's a principal, Carrie Brennicky, a senior planner, and Emma Quinn Smith, the planner. So when I say we, I usually mean them with some help from me. So yeah, next slide. Please. So I'll give you a pretty brief presentation, or I'll try to keep it fairly brief. Already covered introductions. In terms of a project update, I'll briefly talk about the goals of the project, the approach, the timeline or schedule, and what we've done up to this point, and some of the issues we expect to be delving into more deeply and have started to delve into. And then talk about the community engagement efforts we've been undertaking and what we heard from folks. The approach to kind of the next phase, which is actually updating the code, and then, as Megan said, plenty of time for questions from y'all. So next slide, please. So in terms of the project goals, and Megan's talked about some of this already, really, I think kind of first and foremost, make the code easier to use and navigate for applicants, for staff, for planning commissioners if they're reviewing decisions, or so making it easier to use, modernizing it. As Megan said, it's old, hasn't gone through a major update for a very long time, and so there's a lot of things we can do to just make it more digestible, more user-friendly, et cetera, and make sure it's consistent with county priorities. Not that it's not Not that it's inconsistent now, but there are some things we need to bring into the code related to affordable housing, social equity, climate resiliency, and as Megan talked about, really make it a more customer service oriented code to a degree. And I'll say a little bit more about that in more detail. And then as Megan said, we've got a grant from the state, and part of that is aimed at making sure provisions related to housing in particular are clear and objective. So when I say clear and objective, I mean you, I, anyone could look at these standards and say, oh yeah, I understand what that means, and I understand how to implement that. It doesn't require a lot of discretion. That's a state requirement for all housing, so that's important. Yeah, so next slide, please. So there's sort of 4 phases in this process: a review or an audit of the code, including a look at best practices of other counties around the state, coming up with some options and direction for then the next phase, which is the actual code rewrite, and then adoption. I'll talk a little bit more about those first 2 phases on the next slide. So we're kind of just about done with phases 1 and 2. This meeting is sort of the culmination of phase 2, and then we'll be moving into 3 and 4. So this slide sort of repeats the next slide, so I'll go through that one real fast. But we did some best practices research. How are other counties around the state doing, in some cases, a better job of addressing some of the issues that we need to address in your code? We met with a number of folks who are kind of regular users or applicants or represent neighborhood associations or other groups, and had interviews and meetings with them, and then prepared a fairly detailed audit of the code in terms of here's a bunch of detailed stuff that we know we want to try and fix here that implement those overarching goals I talked about earlier. We met with the Planning Commission, reviewed that with them, added some more things based on what they told us in terms of things that are important to address, and then went through a community engagement process to present the results of that. I'll talk about that more in a moment. Refine the issues based on what we heard in those, through those activities. Talked to the Planning Commission again, got some additional direction, and now we're here with you to make sure we're on the right track and see if you have anything to add to what we're doing here. So next one. So I've already kind of covered all this. I won't repeat it. Yep, everything here I talked about before, but those are all the things we've done in phases 1 and 2. Next one. So just a few specific issues, and I'll say a little bit more about this when I get to some recommended improvements to the code. In terms of the way the code's organized, we're not looking at sort of major reorganization, but there are some things that will likely move around within the document. Again, just to make it more easier to navigate, make it make more sense. Megan talked about the fact that there are some application procedures for certain things that are kind of onerous or represent barriers or roadblocks. So we really want to look at those and make sure that those make sense and that they aren't roadblocks to allowing people to do what they need to do or want to do with their land, balancing that with all the other county and state requirements and goals. We'll be looking at both standards that apply kind of throughout the areas that the county regulates, which are really the rural areas of the county, both to the west and east of kind of the city of Portland in the metro area, and also looking at use standards that apply to fairly specific uses in certain locations within the county, as well as things that are called conditional uses. Those are things that are allowed under certain conditions. There's a list of them, there's criteria for allowing them. Those are things we want to look at as well. We've heard that's an important area to look at in the code. So next one. So just a little bit about the community engagement process that we went through this summer. We did a couple of things. One, we had an online engagement activity that really kind of mimicked some in-person meetings that we had. So online, they could see Megan and I doing a presentation and see all the presentation materials we presented. And then we asked people a series of questions that, again, kind of mimicked the questions that we asked people in person. And so use the county's website and interested parties mailing list, and probably even more important, partnered really well, I think, with the neighborhood associations in the areas that the county regulates to spread the word and encourage people to come to our meetings. And they were super helpful in that regard. They used their social media channels and their emailing lists, and so that was really great. So we didn't have a huge number of people that participated online, but just under 60, and then more people that actually came and talked to us in person. So next slide, please. So we had 4 meetings. 3 of them were in partnership with neighborhood associations out on Sauvie Island. I believe Commissioner Moyer attended that one, yeah. And one up in Corbett with the Northeast Multnomah County Community Association. I think I got that acronym right. The Forest Park Neighborhood Association. And then we had one in this room that was meant to be kind of a hybrid meeting. Most people actually participated online, and we really tried hard to get members of the agricultural community to attend that one. So those were the 4 meetings we had. We had a total of about 120 meeting attendees, a lot of sort of boisterous conversation, I'll say, at some of those meetings, especially on Sauvie Island and up in Corbett. But I think even though people sort of voiced a lot of opinions, they were also really appreciative that we were out there meeting with them. And I think we even got applause at the Sauvie Island meeting, which I do not get too often at a public meeting. So that was pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, so that was great. Next slide, I'll talk about some of the things that we heard out there. So really some of the things that people, I think, affirmed or confirmed some of the things we had already said we thought was important, that the code language, in a lot of cases, it's complex, it's difficult to understand or interpret, that there are some specific requirements, I'll talk about them in a moment, a lot of record and full compliance that really can cause a lot of time for applicants to get through and are more challenging than they need to be. Clear and objective standards are really important. And people just said, there's a lot of things where they need to go out and hire somebody to get them through a fairly simple application process, and that shouldn't really be the case. So again, we're trying to get these to a point, some of these standards and processes, so that's not necessary. It probably still will be, for more complicated applications, but it shouldn't be for simple things. So next one. So a few recommendations that, again, kind of get at those larger goals. Just making the code easier to read and understand, using plain language wherever we can. That can be a challenge in a development code, but wherever we can do that, we want to do that. Kind of this sounds simple, but right now, if you've looked at the code, it's in this 2-column format. And if we even just change it to 1 column, I think we will make a lot of people very happy. So there's some simple things like that I think are important. And then using things like graphics and tables to make things easier to understand. I talked about the need to make standards, especially for housing, clear and objective, making sure that we are consistent with state rules, and making sure that the procedures and the requirements are kind of right-sized to fit the issues or fit the conditions within the county. So that's important. And, as Megan said, really, in a lot of areas, what we're still doing is preserving or protecting farm and forest land as well as natural resources, including the Columbia River Gorge. But where homes and businesses are allowed, we want to reduce barriers. We want to allow people to improve those properties and those businesses and make reasonable use of their property. So I think that's really a large goal here to help, where people can run a business or make economic use of that land, help do that. There's a couple of specific things I'll mention. So a lot of record verification, that's a fun phrase. That's essentially the process of verifying that a lot was legally created. Multnomah County takes a very unique approach to that. It's different than a lot of other counties, and it's pretty tough, and it applies to a lot of properties or situations it probably doesn't need to. So that's a thing in particular that if we can simplify that, I think that will help out a lot of folks. Same thing with this full compliance means you're trying to do something on your property and you have to show that everything that's happened is in full compliance with all current regulations. That's neither required by the state or necessary in all cases. So we want to kind of reduce that barrier. And then there's some things in the code that don't actually need to be land use decisions, things like grading plans, things like that. So in those cases, we could move them into a different title of the county's municipal code out of the land use process, just again to kind of reduce the time, effort, and process associated with those things. So that's kind of a quick summary of just some of the specific types of things we want to do. Just looking at my notes to see if I've got anything else. Yeah, I think that kind of covers it, at least at a high level. And I think the last slide, I want to note that there's sort of 3 steps in this process. One, county staff's already been working on some kind of, not exactly housekeeping, but some kind of smaller scale amendments to the code and is moving that through in the near term. And so that will address some of the things we've already been talking about. And then we're moving ahead more quickly on some of those other high priority things I mentioned, the lot of record verification process, the non-conforming situations, and the full compliance requirements. So we're already working on updating those sections of the code. And then in the long term will be this larger scale, more comprehensive update to the code, which will then need to get synced up with the near term and the kind of medium term updates that we're working on. So that's kind of the process and the schedule on that.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
I just want to mention the middle column, the 6 months, which is the code changes we're working on now. Those themes were consistent across staff, our own internal staff thoughts about our code, the consultants' audit from looking at other codes, the focus groups, and the community meetings. So they were all in alignment that these are some of the 3 biggest issues that are problematic for people.
When we had those community meetings, we said, here are some priorities we've identified. What are your priorities? And they said, those things. And then some other, broader things. But there was pretty strong agreement, as Megan said, about that one. So next one. So that's it for the presentation. Happy to answer any questions. And I think, we also would love to get a sense of, are we headed in the right direction? Does what we've described make sense? Is there anything we've missed that's important to all of you? So thank you for having us. And again, happy to answer questions.
Thanks for the presentation. We're going to go to questions now, and maybe if we're going to start with Commissioner Moyer, but in addition to whatever questions you have, maybe also we could leave up the slide that has the two questions the panel had for the commission. If you feel prepared to answer those questions in addition to whatever questions you may have.
Are we headed in the right direction?
Yes.
Yes, I largely think you are headed in the right direction. Is there, and I may have missed it, a time period once you have a draft where there's community input again? Yes, okay, I missed that. Key issue refinement. Okay. I think one of the questions I get a lot in unincorporated Multnomah County is questions related to being confused by the language and how it relates not only our land use process, but I think sometimes there's a confusion between that and building codes, which is a separate issue. But I'm hoping this will no longer be necessary. Many residents found the process so difficult they had to hire attorneys. And I don't want that to be necessary for our community. So I'm really hoping that as we are cleaning up our code, we're also hopefully using plain language as much as possible so that people do not need to hire attorneys in order to try to do an allowable land use. But my question would be, are there any areas in which you think that you might come to the board with change recommendations, things that would require our action in order to align better or make it easier for our residents?
Yeah, all the code changes will come before you. And if there are, right now, our code is supposed to flow from the comprehensive plan. It's possible that there's some things in the comprehensive plan that we think we might need to reopen for discussion, and that would be a board discussion and a planning commission discussion, so absolutely.
Do you want me to answer the second question?
Anything important to the board?
I think I answered that.
All right, we're going to move to Commissioner Singleton, and maybe we could bring the boardroom back up. We can take the questions off. I think everybody's got them.
Yes.
Go ahead, Commissioner
Thank you.
Singleton.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for this work and the engagement. I really appreciate hearing those details. I didn't hear the response to Commissioner Moyer's question about kind of that feedback loop to community as these code changes are made. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so once we have a draft of the new language, for example, the items that we're moving forward more quickly, the 3 changes that we want to make on the 6-month timeline, those will go to the Planning Commission, and we'll have community engagement opportunities for those again, and then they'll come to the board, and there'll, again, obviously be community engagement at that level.
Yeah, and I would say same thing with any items that are sort of coming up in the broader update that are things we want to make sure we touch base with the community about. I mean, I think that some of the things that are just trying to make the code easier to use or streamlined maybe are less important to check in on. But if there's substantive issues where we really want to get community feedback, I think there will be an engagement process, subsequently in that part of the planning process as well to ask some of those questions. So yeah, definitely probably a couple of different points where we'll be out talking to folks or soliciting their feedback.
Great, thank you. I think the big thing that sticks out to me is that plain language component. It seems to kind of show up in a couple of different ways in your presentation. So I'll definitely be interested in hearing how folks respond to any updates and does it feel more understandable. And then the slide that has refined recommendations, there's the review, simplify application review processes. That piece as well, I'll be interested in as folks try to navigate the new process. How is that going? So do you have engagement work around that component of those process changes that you have planned?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, again, I think that would be another place where we might want to ask folks some questions. I think, so land use application and review processes, they're typically organized into sort of 3 types of processes. They're called type 1, type 2, and type 3. Or type 4 when you get into really higher level things. And I think the goal in some cases is going to be to take some of those type 2 things and make them type 1 because they don't necessarily need a public hearing process or a public notice process. In some cases, they can be more administrative in nature. So I think those are some of the types of changes that we're looking at in terms of some of the review procedures, just making it easier to do things that don't require discretion, that can be based on clear and objective standards. So yeah, I think as I've worked on similar processes in other places, those are some of the types of things we ask people about. What do you think about these changes to these procedures? So.
Wonderful, thank you. I appreciate it.
Commissioner Singleton, do you want to, if you care to answer the questions, are they headed in the right direction or is there anything they missed?
I honestly really defer to the 2 commissioners who are more impacted by this. I think my questions, those engagement pieces, they're on the right track as long as we've got that feedback loop. So I think y'all are handling this really well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Singleton. Commissioner Jones-Dickson.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner or Vice Chair Brim Edwards. And thank you for the presentation. Extremely excited about, or just for today and the general updates. And thank you, Director Bradway, for your leadership as well. Just a couple general questions. Are we able to see the audit that was completed? That way we can look. We would like to look through it for our office. I believe we're on the right track. The feedback is reflective of the things that we've heard directly from community, both from NEPCA. I've been out to Topaz Farm as well as far as hearing from them. Not surprised that you got cheering and all the things. I'm pretty sure they were present. They were present. One of the things that I mentioned to your office is around just like agro-tourism and business in general and how the code is impacting that. And then also I met with a community member over the summer and they were talking about how difficult it was to build a deck and the questions, and it sounds like the work that we're doing will address that. Can we explicitly state like how the code is going to impact just the folks that live in community, or is that a part of the plan or the audit, or was that highlighted?
Yeah, and even staff highlighted this issue. We have, our requirements for what is exempt from certain permits are pretty small. So we'd like to have a larger envelope of projects that don't require that level of land use review, like a deck or an air conditioning unit. So we don't want to be treating, these giant complex projects with the same standards and same process that we would do something very simple. So it will save us time as well to not have to put those small projects through a giant process. So that is absolutely one of the ways that we hope to save time for the community and for our planners.
Great, thank you.
Another example that came up was solar, just wanting to install solar, should I have to go through a land use process for that? And then I will also note that agritourism provisions in the code was something the Planning Commission also identified as something we should be looking at. So, so those are both things that we want to take a look at.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you. And then also I agree, just the need for better customer service, whether it's communication, access, having the desk open. That's something that community members mentioned. The application reviews, I believe for certain projects, the timeline is different. And I believe that's something that, could you share, is that something that will be addressed in the code updates? And actually, could you share an example of that too?
Yeah, in terms of the different types of processes having different, how long it takes us to process the application?
Yeah, I think the state law or our code says it takes like 100 days. And I was talking to a farmer and they said it might be a year or two before we hear anything because there's no the rules aren't clear.
Yeah, so there's and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong because he's our expert, but 150-day time frame outside the UGB for permit applications. Sometimes the permits get sequenced in a way, so even though the permits might meet that time frame, once you do all 4 of them that you need, you are past a whole year, right? So we are looking at how we can better move them all together concurrently, or we're looking for ways to do that, actually even now, outside of this process, so that it's not such a lengthy time frame for people.
Got it. And then lastly, that's good to hear. And then lastly, as far as the tools that we use internally, are there conversations around like using technology or what have you to manage the process so it's easier for our planners? Or I know that's on the operation side, but.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I'll be curious. There's, at the upcoming AOC conference, there's actually the planning directors from around the state are going to be talking about that topic. So I don't know a whole lot about it in terms of how other communities are using AI as an example. So I'll look forward to that discussion. I'll be happy to share with you what I learn.
Yeah, and then has there been any feedback from our planners on that, or just different tools that will make it easier or help us be more efficient?
So the question is, are we looking at technology to help speed up permitting?
Yeah, or
Yeah,
any
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, outside of having like better templates for some of our processes, I think, that's probably one of the best ways. Frankly, having the more planners to process the permits. And then with the code update, just when it's a simpler process, there should be fewer standards that have to be addressed. So, maybe not so much the technology side, but just a combination of those things, right? Like if we have, sort of easier processes out of the box, when somebody comes in, I want to do, an outbuilding, and we've got a kind of template that's already set up, and, we can sort of fill in the blanks, clear and objective standards, so, it's sort of yes or no questions, you can get through it in, maybe 30 days instead of 150, right? If it's a type 1 process. So, yes, the combination of things, I think, is really where we're going.
Yeah, and I'll just add briefly, again, this isn't directly related to technology, and it is related to things that these folks have said, but one of the things we heard both from people who submit applications, but also from staff, is that because the code is complex and often difficult to understand, staff spends a lot of time just walking people through things, just explaining things to people. And if we can make it simpler and they don't have to spend all that time, then that's more time for them to help process applications and speeds up that time frame as well. And just sort of, this isn't also necessarily technology, but it kind of gets to Kevin's comment about templates. Also things just like checklists, so it's like easy for somebody to go, oh yeah, I have provided all these materials in the way that the county's asking for, to be able to, for staff to be able to review the application and make the decision. So I think there's probably some things like that that are a little bit outside the code itself, but can help implement some of the changes in the code.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. Beyond excited. Like I said, the feedback has been good from community, and appreciate, again, just going out and listening, directing, listening to them and weaving that into the work. So thank you again.
Thank you.
I think,
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, related to the customer service side, one of the things that there was feedback on that I don't think necessarily involves this, but I wanted to check in on, is the fact that once a application is assigned to somebody, they are still, when a question is asked or when communication is back and forth, individuals have been led to respond or ask questions to a general email box and not an individual email box, and each follow-up question is another 2 weeks. And I was wondering if there is an update or a time frame of when we might be able to, once a permit is assigned to somebody, that communication can continue back and forth between the applicant and the employee.
That is an excellent comment. That is one of the customer-centered approaches that we're working on right now. We're trying to, once we get the new people on, we're looking at splitting them up into teams so that the simpler permits can go through a faster process. I agree with you. I don't like the generic email response. I don't think that's good customer service. So it has helped for coverage for staff that anybody can respond to something. So we have to balance that ability for when a planner's out, that someone can respond. But at the same time, I think that it doesn't always help with the public feeling like they're actually talking to a person or communicating with a person.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thanks for the presentation. I'm going to start with the first question. Are we heading in the right direction? Yes, and I really appreciate the project goals laid out at the very beginning. And what I would hope to see, this isn't something you've missed, but just something I would like to see as the process continues, is just a check back on the changes that are being made and proposed. How are they aligning and delivering on the project goals? Sometimes I know, like, huge projects, you start with project goals, and then by the time you get to the end, it's like things have morphed, and just recentering back on the project goals. And one of the project goals I really appreciate is the goal that making the code relatively simple, so that if you have a simple project, that you don't have to hire professional help. I will say, as somebody who's done some projects, not in Multnomah County, and I feel like I've been around government speak for a long time, and I can read the double columns and everything else. But when you have a simple project and you actually have to go out, and even if you're relatively used to dealing with government regulations or code, you have to hire somebody externally. That in and of itself is often a barrier to people. So I'm glad that's something that you're considering, of like, if we have something simple, you should be able to, the average community member should be able to find it accessible and be able to move through it without having to pay somebody to help them through it. So I love that goal. I did have a question on this, and this is more of like an overarching question. On the project goals, one of the goals is make the code consistent with county policy priorities, and then it lists them, but the first one is promote affordable housing. And I'm curious, what are some of the things that might be changed that would promote affordable housing?
That's an excellent question, since we don't have, it's rural zoning, right? So, however, there are areas where we currently don't allow ADUs. Now, there are some zones where we're not allowed to allow them because of state law. The exclusive farm use in commercial forestry use zones. But outside of those, we could allow ADUs, and we don't. We have a lot of illegal ADUs that are out there. Anyway, so that's an opportunity. You know, it helps provide more stable income for a farmer, for example. It provides a more affordable housing potentially for somebody. Of course, you have to pair that with looking at short-term rentals, and that's a whole nother issue. So that we'll have to have that discussion at that time. But that's one example of how we can help support additional housing.
And this is just a sort of a future question. I'd be interested in other ways that we can think of, since that is a huge issue in the community, other ways that we can think of using the code to further that particular goal. And that is, I don't think you're missing anything. And again, I appreciate the questions from the two commissioners who have a lot of impacted properties in the county. So are there any other questions from commissioners before we wrap up?
Thank you.
Any final words?
No, thank you. We're excited, and we'll actually be back, land use will be back on Thursday for our fee waiver item. But we're excited to be here, and it's been a pleasure to update you on this project. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh,
I think, and if we voted on this, I apologize. I know that there was hope to move one land use change early related to fire prevention, fire sprinkler systems on houseboat docks. Am I getting that right? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, so that's actually not a code issue, that's an IGA issue.
That's an IGA issue.
And
Okay.
we are working on that.
Okay.
We've had several meetings with the city, and we're still plugging away.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
all right, if there's no more questions or discussion, that concludes today's meeting. Our next meeting will be our regular board meeting scheduled for Thursday, October 30th at 9:30 a.m. There being no further business, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.